Dutton's new book, or my friend Levitin's book, which argues that you can actually learn from evolutionary biology, putting Charles Darwin to one side. You can actually learn a great deal about why it is, not only why people want works of art, songs, stories, pictures, but it can explain to you the kinds of art that we make, the kinds of songs we love to listen to, and so on. And in the part of the book that I excised for undue length and marginal relevance to the subject, one of the things that I was trying to argue for is that it kind of gets the story upside down, because one of the things that if you're interested in music, and I very much enjoyed Levitin's book, which is a terrific book about the neurology of music, what happens in your head when this is your brain on music, as it's called. Nonetheless, there's no way that using that line of investigation you're ever going to be able to tell the difference between Mozart and Barry Manilow. There's no critical function. And yet our whole experience of music is about the difference between Mozart and Barry Manilow, and even about finer distinctions than that. It's about the distinction between Mozart and Paul McCartney and Barry Manilow. And you know that outsiders to our musical culture but have a hard time understanding why Paul McCartney is a genius and Barry Manilow is a hack, widely considered. And that those distinctions aren't sort of fine-tuning on the picture, that there where our real experience of art begins. Nobody is a music fan. They're a Mozart fan, or a Bach fan, a McCartney fan, or, God help us, a Manilow fan.
There must be some.
There must be some. It goes on.
Yeah.
And that therefore, the juice that you could squeeze out of Darwinism directly applied to the arts was limited. It seems to me in your writings you've taken a sort of Solomonic midpoint position on this question. I wanted to see if I could get you into an argument about it.
Yeah, I actually agree that that the sciences of human nature in general, which are to be informed by evolutionary biology, among other things, don't, at least as yet, answer the question of what's the difference between Mozart and Barry Manilow. In fact, and I argue in How the Mind Works that, it shouldn't take on that task. That as the first scientific question that you want to ask, if you're just looking at Homo sapiens as this very interesting species, the difference between Manilow and Mozart, as fascinating as it is to us as listeners, is actually scientifically not the first question you want to ask. You want to ask, why does the whole species get pleasure out of
abstract sounds?
Out of abstract sounds in certain rhythmic and harmonic relationships. And in fact, until you answer that question, you're certainly not going to be able to explain Mozart or Kandinsky or Shakespeare or any of the elite forms of art. So I agree with that, and I have been, even though I am a strong advocate of applying the sciences of human nature, evolutionary psychology, linguistics, cognitive science, cognitive neuroscience, to provide insight into the arts, I've argued against my colleagues who start off with elite art, presumably because that's what they enjoy, but scientifically that isn't where you should begin. It's a bridge too far. That I think that, first of all, you want to characterize the parts of psychology that are relevant to aesthetic appreciation. Language in the case of poetry and prose, visual perception in the case of painting and sculpture, auditory perception in the case of music, and so on. To explain why we have the visual reactions that we do, I think it is relevant to appeal to evolution. Why does the visual system like certain contours rather than others? That is a question.
Line of beauty, right?
Exactly. And more generally, why do we have the visual system that we have as opposed to all kinds of other visual systems that robots and computers and digital cameras have? That will give you insight into aesthetics. But of course, art and aesthetics aren't the same thing. We don't just look at pretty things. Art has certain meanings, it has certain functions in a given society at a given time.
It operates in realms of perversity and
absolutely
arbitrary alteration.
Dada and postmodernism and all kinds of kind of anti-aesthetic art. So while I do think that a Darwinian approach gives you insight into art, it doesn't in one step. It's evolutionary considerations help to explain our perceptual and cognitive faculties, which help to explain our aesthetic reactions, which are relevant to the art of a given time or place, and to expert, elite, magnificent art. But to hope that Darwin will explain Mozart is trying to swallow too much at once. I also think contra both Dutton and Levitin, and in fact both of them I think set me up as their foil. It's not clear to me that a lot of forms of art or aesthetic appreciation are adaptations in Darwin's sense, in the sense of an innate feature that enhanced the rate of reproduction of our ancestors. That it is quite possible that many of the aesthetic experiences that we most value as people don't have a biological function in the technical sense. And a lot of people in the arts
not adaptive.
They're not adaptations what? In the technical sense in which a biologist characterizes an adaptation. Now, a lot of people in the arts hate that. And there's a split personality in how a lot of intellectuals react to evolutionary explanations. On the one hand, there's an attitude that nothing can ever be shown to be an adaptation, and it's wicked to ever try to show that something is an adaptation. On the other hand, it's obvious that art is an adaptation, and it's wicked to deny that art is an adaptation. I've argued that this comes from a confusion of the meaning of adaptation, which in the vernacular means something that is beneficial, healthy, salubrious, to be valued. In the biologist sense, it just means something that increased the reproduction of our ancestors in the environment in which our species spent its evolutionary history. And what we value as humans and what was a Darwinian adaptation needn't, and in fact often don't coincide. My favorite example is reading, which is
clearly not
one of the most glorious of our accomplishments, is clearly not a Darwinian adaptation.
It's too recent to.
It's too recent. It's not naturally acquired. We've got to send our kids to school. It's only developed in a small number of societies, and so on. On the other hand, one could make an argument that genocide is an evolutionary adaptation, and so it's just important to distinguish, as I think not enough people do, what we value, what's adaptive in the sense of healthy, and what is adaptive in the technical sense of biology.
Makes more of you if you kill off all the neighboring tribe rather than,
or for whatever reason,
reading Louisa May Alcott makes fewer of you. But isn't it possible, Stephen, that it's not just that it's a bridge too far, but that it's a bridge that leads to a different place? That is, that it's a bridge that in a certain sense the cavalry will never arrive to cross. That is, that couldn't you believe, after all, in some form of an, even if you want an adaptationist view of art. After all, if you have a teenage kid in the house, it's hard for you to believe that music and sex are somehow not closely conjoined or even identical, whatever the explanation for it might be. It certainly has a look of an adaptation, but yet to think that whatever the emergent system is that we call music, that changes, it has its own internal rules, that has its own internal perversions, where you and I both are of a generation to have lived through punk rock, which rests in a popular form, not at all in an elite form, but a great popular music which rests on not being able to play your instrument, on not being a virtuoso, not being particularly skilled, not singing particularly well, and all of those things become, in the course of the particular game that's played, positive, aesthetic virtues. So isn't it possible that these are, to use Stephen Gould's term from another sphere, that these are magisterium that will not unite, that aren't dependent on one another, and that one can continue to be curious about the evolutionary roots of aesthetics in that general sense, that it's very unlikely that we'll ever find even the most isolated tribe in wherever it is they look for isolated tribes now, in the Amazon or the Philippines, who don't have some kind of music in some sense. That may well be true, but that it's the capacity of that insight to tell us anything significant or to engage in our critical discourse about Mozart and Manilow will always be limited or non-existent. So that's a bridge, that the bridge will always be a phantom.
No, I think the sequence of bridges will always be there, and that I don't think that there should be any body of knowledge that is completely walled off from the rest of knowledge, where you just say it's the way it is. who cares why it is the way it is? Who cares where it came from? And I certainly don't believe that that's true of culture in the old sense of Durkheim, that only culture can explain culture. I don't think that you're going to be able to deduce the appearance of Mozart from Darwinian first principles. I think it would be just incurious not to ask the question of what is it about, it may be human